Hello and good morning. Welcome to Mountain Standard Time. I'm your host, Nathan Giede, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about the federal election. Before we get going too far down that road, however, I would like to, of course, do our endorsement of Resistance Coffee. Resistance Coffee is based in Weyburn, Saskatchewan, and instead of taking your money and using them for woke causes, to put it as plainly as you can, they help increase your freedom. So if you're looking for a coffee company that doesn't want to just curtail your freedoms and doesn't want to put a social agenda upon you, but rather defend the freedoms you already have and hopefully expand them, look no further than Resistance Coffee, again, based in Weyburn. And you can order their stuff online using our promo code Western Standard for 10% off your first order. Well, I mean, it's that time of day again. We are going to get into the depths of the federal election. This should be noted right from the top here that this show is going on hiatus. That is to say, at least I'm going on hiatus. I'm getting married in less than 40 days. Everything that I do when you don't see me in front of this camera and in front of this microphone is for the wedding. It's being hosted on my parents' farm, so that's a whole logistical thing. People are still, being invited. There are various family drama about everything from questions of vaccinations to where people are going to stay, etc. It's all a bit all over the place. But the point is that I just don't have the capacity to do both the show right now and prepare for my nuptials. So I'm thankful and hopeful that you'll all have that patience with me and whomever is either chosen to guest host in my stead, or if the show is indeed replaced for that time of hiatus and they put something else in the slot of 9 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Mountain to 11 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Mountain. So that's that. You have that update. Again, I'm going to miss all of you very much, but here's my opening statement. Let's get through this pre-recorded version of Mountain Standard Time. The short version of the story is that the Liberals are likely to win in the fall. This is not to say that there is no possibility of an upset. The Grits have been in power for years, and they've created more scandals than any other government in recent history. But between Trudeau's charisma and the party machinery of really the most successful party on earth, in many respects, certainly in the English-speaking world, they've held power longer, they've had control more often, and quite frankly, they've shaped the entire narrative of a country that up until they took over with Laurier had been run by conservatives. That party machinery and Trudeau's charisma, there is no effective opposition that stands in the way of a third mandate for these people. We must understand that effective opposition is the name of the game when it comes to the Westminster model. The reason the government sits in aisles, right, so it sits across from each other and not in a semicircle, is to ensure that everyone knows which side of an issue you are on. As Winston Churchill said long ago, in a half circle, people can move laterally, gradually, slowly changing their position. And of course, he was talking about that on an issue. You owe your voters an honest take of where you stand and where you sit. And Winston Churchill had the right to say that because Winston Churchill crossed the floor something like 4 times in order to keep his principles alive. He was a liberal, he was a Tory, he was a liberal, he was a Tory. And then he went on to win World War II. So anybody who says a floor crossing is completely unforgivable doesn't understand the fundamental principles of Parliament and is, in effect, disowning the man who won World War II. Unfortunately, even with the geography of Canada's Parliament, the Tories have slowly but surely moved to the left on most social issues and towards austerity on most economic ones. The Conservative base is made up of social conservatives and, I would say, fiscal stewards. There are some fiscal hawks in there, but for the most part, I don't think that most conservatives are austerity conservatives. That's a very small amount of conservatives. And a lot of those austerity conservatives are actually people who are just looking to make the rents themselves, right? So they're tired that there's a kind of public subsidy in that area. And if only that public subsidy was eliminated, then they could take that money off of people directly themselves. And they would be very interested in doing that. And that's fine. I understand that. That's basic self-interest. But that doesn't mean that it's okay. And I don't have a lot of time for austerity conservatives. They always seem to, not be able to put two and two together. They don't want to suffer. That's another part of the conservative base. For most of them don't want to suffer the American experience in healthcare. There are plenty of people who are interested in renovating Canadian healthcare, but they are not interested in having a fundamentally private option or only a private option. Aaron O'Toole would do well to recall all of that when he looks at his base and realizes how he has to motivate them to vote. While the Liberals are dictating the narrative, the Tories are sweeping up the crumbs, calling them their own when clearly they're not, or worse, declaring these small bits as high crimes against our common humanity, while Justin Trudeau and the gang make off with the entire cupboard or pantry. None of what the Conservatives are saying or doing resonates with the population in general. This is ironic because the Liberals are extremely weak everywhere. A combining of benefits that puts families first would outflank them on social policy. We just got through the CERB. We just got through all of that, all the kind of subsidies that were handed out in order to survive COVID. I am not saying I want the Canadian government to be in debt forever. I'm not saying I want a model of income that just makes no sense or is built on a house of cards. But I think we're getting to a point where our society understands that unless we start having a serious renovation of our wages, and for that matter, tariffs and all sorts of other economic national policy that'll ensure that cheap labor is kept out, and labor can increase its pricing with a shortened supply, combined with supplies from overseas are also cut off, that we start to make things here at home. We need to start thinking about how we're going to properly redistribute wealth, not by higher taxation and not by the bizarre system of income taxation that we have and the loopholes we have, but probably a far more simplified benefit system where we combine child benefits and some of the ideas around universal basic income. And for myself, I must be completely clear, that would mean essentially helping one parent stay at home, and that the family would be the basis of economic well-being. Even in the poorest quarters, that family would be incentivized. The home would be built again, and home made great again, I guess, by allowing one of the spouses, one of the parents, to remain free to take care of the children. Economically wealthy, no, but free to take care of the children in a simplified benefit format. Especially when we talk about universal childcare and all that jazz. You know where the easiest childcare is? The fastest commute to childcare is at home. Okay? Just like everything else. Cheapest way to get better food and to make sure it's higher quality and ensure there's less pollution around transporting food, grow it at home. Homesteading. Homesteading is the rule of thumb. And if we have to have a more urban version of homesteading, so be it. But I would still argue that the best thing you could hope for is to have one parent staying at home. But the Conservatives could definitely outflank the Liberals on this. And it's not something that the Liberals really have an answer to. They don't have an answer to national strategy, and they don't have an answer to, well, just so many things, because they don't have a plan. They just have a series of praxis, a series of techniques that they keep the population under control with, and they incentivize people to vote for them. But the Conservatives really could push through if they had a national vision. Transgenderism is another thing that could easily get them votes in the federal election. O'Toole and his advisors have gotten far too close to the Liberals on too many issues. I see no effective opposition in this country, at least at the federal level. And until something changes on that, we're doomed. So let us pray that the Conservatives in Canada figure out a little bit more what they ought to be doing, and that slowly but surely, a real vision for the true North, strong and free, or even for us out here in the West, hopefully that comes to pass. So we are going to work our way through a couple of different items today, and we're probably going to start off with the polling data as it stands here in Canada. We are We're an interesting country. We have a kind of bizarre model. Having watched many American elections, I've kind of come to believe that Canada's boundary system for its ridings, which are better built than the American ones, let's be clear. They're not gerrymandered, not the way the American ones are. A couple of them could use some work, but they are not like the American ones, which follow highways for miles at a time just to capture two different areas of rich folk or poor folk or middle folk or black folk, white folk, whatever you want to say. Whomever they're trying to capture a certain catchment of people so that they can ensure that that riding always stays blue or red or whatever it is, right? In Canada, we have some similar problems, but fewer of them, far fewer. And I think the other side of it is that when it comes to the federal election, our riding system is kind of interesting because it almost acts as a sort of electoral college to a point, right? Because I mean, different provinces are weighted differently. They have different amounts of seats, and it's something we need to change. Make no mistake. I'm not advocating for Central Canada having as many seats as they have, even because of their population. And as I've said a few times before on this show, my solution to the Canadian problem is pretty severe. It's a complete redrawing of the boundaries within Canada to the point where we are a loosely confederated entity, a very loosely confederated, essentially empire, the Empire of Canada. Perhaps the capital stays in Ottawa, perhaps not. But we use something that wouldn't look too different, honestly, that wouldn't look too different from a riding, well, a boundary map that you would see if you go to your bishop's office and you see a diocesan map of all of Canada. There's about 47 or 48 dioceses in Canada, and I would say that's about as many provinces as we need to properly address the issues. And before anybody gets all up in my face, particularly people who think the church burnings are okay right now, not that there's a lot of people watching this channel that are on that side of the issue, but all I'm saying is people for or against that sort of thing, and people have problems with, church influence ever, just for different reasons, and fair enough. I would invite you to look at that map. And the reason I'd invite you to look at that map is that it does things. I think I've mentioned this before as well, but it does things like include Churchill with all of none of it. None of it and Churchill are far closer in culture, people, understanding than Churchill and even Thompson, let alone Churchill and Winnipeg. And so the reason I use this example is, quite frankly, I still see Churchill as a key strategic area in Canada, especially if we're going to get serious about doing things in the Northwest Passage and taking advantage of whatever is happening with the climate. The fact of the matter is, if the ice pack is moving, then we can use that for better logistics and for world trade and international trade, and ensure that we're getting our goods to market and ensure that we're getting a good price for our goods. We're not just exclusively selling them to the Americans and therefore getting, but we're a captive market. We're getting chump change. But the point that I'm trying to drive home here when it comes to redrawing the boundaries of Canada is that Churchill should have joined none of it a long time ago. It should have joined the Northwest Territories. That was actually discussed under the last Trudeau. I met a man in his 80s who remembers Trudeau the Elder and discussed with him at the Churchill Airport the possibility of Churchill being reappropriated into the Northwest Territories because it wasn't really getting anything out of being in Manitoba. And Trudeau Sr. smiled, nodded, and then proceeded to get on his flight as fast as possible to avoid the rest of this conversation. So that's kind of, I guess, the place to put it in a sense of where do you go from here, or how do you think about this equation? Where do you actually feel at home? Do you feel at home as a rural person that's near Calgary and Calgary sucks up all of the energy? Do you feel home in British Columbia when a place like Vancouver sucks up most of the political and economic energy, or Victoria? The rest of the island, if you go up North Island is not like South Island at all in British Columbia. South Island is urbanized and government workers, and yeah, it's very statist and it's the soft statist but somewhat severe socialism of a boomer town, right? All these people are boomers. They're older. They have to be older in order to afford housing down there. It's a very interesting sort of setup. I'm not even trying to throw boomers under the bus there. I'm just saying it Victoria is, if you aren't working for the government, you can't afford to live there. And so that's South Island. North Island, I'm not saying there's nothing pricey in North Island, but these are people who have to live by their own two hands, and they still have logging, they still have natural resource extraction, and there's a lot of working class mentality, which, while it might lean all sorts of directions, right-wing populists, left-wing populists, they care about their elders having proper health care, and they care about their communities, and it makes a more kind of communitarian and, honor-based society than sort of the urbanized, alienated society down south. And again, what do you feel more connected to? What do you feel more connected to? Where should your boundaries be in order to feel like you are being properly represented at any level of government? Also, that you feel like you have a proper group of people that you're with, the people who you can actually identify with. That is my point when it comes to what's wrong with Canadian federalism. That's my entire point. I think that Canada's federal issues are, and provincial ones for that matter, are never going to be solved until you redraw the boundaries and make Canada this loosely confederated entity that quite frankly is it looks a little bit more like the United States, but probably more like the Eastern United States, which follow natural curves. They're not just random lines that are drawn in the middle of the map. They're more natural. They're built around rivers and watersheds, and I would say the same of Canada, at least in the West and throughout all of Canada. I think the next thing to kind of get into here, though, is the polling data itself. So let's kind of jump into that as best we can. Where are we sitting at right now? I think the Conservatives sit at like 100 and something seats anyways. They sit at about 100 seats. And right now they're saying that we're going to get certainly at least a second Liberal minority, because 162. No, we have 330. How many seats do we have in Parliament right now? We have 338? I guess we have 338. Well, that would mean that would be enough. So they're looking at a second Liberal majority under this current leader. The NDP, again, staying down in the 30s, the Bloc staying in the 30s, and of course the Conservatives staying at about 105. I'll zoom in for that for you in case you can't quite read it from there. And supposedly the Greens are going to take a seat, depending on whether or not they can, just manage their issues. They still have Anna May Paul in charge of things. And that's where that sits right now. I must admit that I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. The Liberal Party of Canada is one of the most successful parties on the face of the earth when it comes to their electioneering. More successful than the Democrats of the United States, more successful than the Republicans of the United States, even since '88, which some leftists have some very particular things to say about. We'll get into that at our next show when we have Stuart Parker on later this week. But truly, when you think about the fact that we've had a conservative party in this country in one form or another from its founding, a Conservative Party founded it, their lack of success is just abysmal. Like it's just astonishing how lacking in success they've been since basically Borden left office, which would have been World War I. So between Laurier in the early century all the way to Trudeau today, the Liberals have, of our we're on our 34th or 35th prime minister, the Liberals have of those like 12 or 15. It's not the way it ought to be. It ought to be less than that, but the Liberals have ruled this country for an exorbitant amount of time. And the reason that the Liberals are capable of doing that is that they have this bizarre consensus where the Québécois know that they can trust the Liberals to not throw them under the bus or force them to meet the standards or rules that the rest of Canada is forced to meet when it comes to language laws, censorship, culture, immigration. So the Québécois know that if they vote Liberal, they're going to have their interests protected, either Bloc or Liberal. They'll have their interests protected. And the Central Canadians know that is to say the Ontarians, Upper Canada, and for that matter, Atlantic Canada. Atlantic Canada knows that its entitlements won't be curtailed, right? So, no offense to Atlantic Canada, but Atlantic Canada has been in one way or another. So I think some of the lowest thresholds for getting on EI in the whole country. You only have to work 16 weeks, 20 weeks, whatever it is, and you qualify for EI in Atlantic Canada in a way that you just don't everywhere else in the country. You have to have worked basically a year to qualify for EI, or the equivalent of a year in hours, not for it in months, because you're working overtime, but to get your layoff proper and then to get full benefits in many other parts of Canada, you don't you have to work for longer. And so the benefits that go out into Atlantic Canada, not to mention the government jobs that are placed out there in order to kind of shore it up and redistribute wealth from one part of the country to the other. Same with Quebec, and even same with Ontario, right? So Quebec, Ontario, and the Maritimes all carry a good deal of government jobs, which are paid for by the West, which we to discuss at length on this show, because of course this is the Sovereignty Channel, and we want people to be assured that at least agitating for sovereignty is very much on our minds. But more of a say for the West in any case. However, the point that I'm trying to drive home here is that when it comes to the Liberal Party, they have this kind of brilliant blended model. Most Maritimers don't have time for anything that are mainstream Liberal Party values nowadays. I'm guessing most Maritimers don't have time for censorship. Maritimers are always known for kind of speaking their mind. That's kind of what they do. Laid back, but speaking their mind. They and having, some traditional values in a sense of like they come from old stock and they come from a heritage that is deep and rich and full of suffering, for that matter. Some real suffering in those times, but that makes them real people, to put it that way. But the Maritimers have no love lost for the Liberals. There's no reason to vote Liberal, really, but they do it in order to shore up their own benefits, because it's in their interest. It's in the Quebecois interest, and then it's in Central Canada's interest, again, because the Liberals can be relied upon to kind of ensure that what social helps there are right now aren't taken away. Maybe they're even slightly expanded, but they will also keep the ship running because they have just so much political clout everywhere. They know so many people everywhere. They know everybody on Bay Street. They know everybody that's building the ships in the shipyards. They know everybody. They know all the oligarchs. All the oligarchs know who the Liberals are. They all have them on their cell phones. They all have direct line communication between their families and the people who run the Liberal Party of Canada. And so there's a deal that's kind of struck throughout Central Canada, Upper Lower Canada, Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes. And that is that these people can be trusted to keep the ship afloat, not cause austerity, certainly not the austerity that the Conservatives would cause if they were in charge. And they just know how to run Canada because they've been doing it so long. We're just going to keep them in charge. And I tell you this as a Conservative, as somebody who considers himself quite right of center. I must admit that logic is hard to defeat. And it's really hard to defeat, especially when you have a complete lack of opposition by the Conservatives. The Conservatives have completely lost their minds. They've completely lost their value structure. I don't even know if I want to say they lost their minds. They become all logic and no heart, and a complete loss of understanding of where the base is at. The base is nowhere else to be found. The base is in one place, and that is in the socially conservative milieu for the most part. And I'm talking about people. You don't have to be a social conservative. Like, people think that I want to kind of clarify something here. People think to be a social conservative, you have to be like with me and even friends to my right who are a part of a pretty traditionalist wing in the Catholic Church, who think that, all contraception is wrong, and that life is for the multiplication of children, and having your family first, which means, of course, children, a family, and your spouse, your wife, loving your spouse with all your heart, dying to yourself, etc. Going to church regularly, probably too much, according to most people, and And everything else revolves around that. The center of your social life, the center of your kind of your community life is your church, your parish, and you go build the church of home with children, with family, with the investment thereof, and everything else is secondary. Even your career, that's just there to support the family. You don't. I'm not there even necessarily for self fulfillment. I want to contribute in a meaningful way, and I want my talents to be used. But my career is not my primary duty. My primary duty is my family, and part of my vocation is quite literally to be fruitful and multiply, to bring more souls to God. That might sound like total kooky town to some people, I know. And I'm not saying that that's the base of the Conservative Party, not even close. But if that's the far end, if that's the extreme of the base, then let's wander our way back towards something closer in the middle. Let's say you are a person who has no problem with contraception. Let's say you're a person who really does think that their career is about equal importance to their family, or at least that's where they were getting their fulfillment before they found their spouse. And now, because they didn't get married that young, and so they are a typical, somewhat middle class, even upper middle class, suburban sort of family, or even a rural family that's just managed to make good money at something. They've got a decent business. They have 2 or 3 kids, and that's it. They don't have 4 kids. They don't have 6 kids. They don't have 9 kids. They have 2 or 3 at most. And even in her fertile years, the wife is taking contraception, and they are staying very straight and narrow on how many kids they want to have, and they put all that excess time into their careers and paying down the mortgage, etc. Now, that family still has plenty of quote unquote socially conservative things going on inside of it that are still applicable to the Tories. The Tories could still reach in and motivate that family. They don't have to just be the Christian Heritage Party in order to get people to vote for them. And one of the ways I would say that is that I think that family, especially if those kids are somewhere between the ages of 8 and 18, they're putting their kids, whether they put them through French immersion, which of course is subsidized private school for the rich, but we'll talk about that another time. But whether they're putting them through French immersion, or they do have them in private school, or they just don't have the money for that, but they put them through a really good public high school, that high school is preaching a doctrine of transgenderism. And I'm guessing that no matter how progressive that family feels on a given day, they have a cousin who's LGBTQ, they have maybe gone to a parade or whatever, or they don't mind putting up a rainbow flag during Pride Month on their Facebook. They might have all that stuff going for them, but none of them think for even a second that they want their daughter or their son to change genders. They don't want that. They don't want that at all. They don't agree with that. The vast majority of them do not believe that you can just wake up one morning and decide that I'm not a girl anymore, I'm a boy now, or I'm not a boy anymore, I'm a girl now. And I'm going to not just dress like it or put up some makeup or whatever. I am literally going to get surgery in order to irreversibly damage my anatomy and change my gender. The vast majority of Canadians don't agree with that. And you don't have to be some kind of radically traditional Catholic person. And I don't even get to go to the Latin Mass, mind you, because we don't have it here in Prince George. But the point is that you don't need that guy to vote for you and then lose everybody else, the 9/10 of the rest of the block, and now you've lost that poll and the Liberals have gained that seat. You don't need just me. There are plenty of people along the rest of the 9/10 of this block, this poll, this district, who do not agree. And you don't need to be in just rural Alberta or rural British Columbia or Ontario for that to be the case. No, there are plenty of people in suburban ridings and even, I would argue, even in, downtown municipal urban ridings, that the center of cities, who do not agree, particularly with the transgender agenda. The idea that somebody who is older, wants to do that stuff to themselves and pay their own way. Nobody's going to argue with that, because most people are civil libertarians on that account. Those of us who are more religious, whatever else, still gonna be like, that's not okay. But do we think that we have the right to interfere with it, like at a kind of state level, legal level, logistical level? Not really. And not you do you, boo. Nobody really wants to say it that way. But the fact of the matter is that an adult's an adult's an adult. Like, I can't do much about it in a secular democracy when an adult wants to do this thing to their body or to their psychology, etc., to their hormones. But children are a different matter. Children belong to all of us at a certain level because that's the future of the country, and their innocence and their integrity and their ability to grow in confidence of what they are. They were born with a certain set of genitalia, which is directly identified one-to-one with most of their psychology, biology, and physiology. And for those outliers, that's a different grace, a different question, a different sort of compassion. But for something that you can't even say is the vast majority, with something that is the entirety of the population, with few caveats, people are born with a certain set of genitalia, which then which directly conforms to their psychology, biology, and for that matter, for those of us who believe in such a thing, their soul. That is not a controversial statement. That only became a controversial statement because of a bunch of 12-year-olds on Twitter and other activists trying to turn it into a controversial statement. And I'm not afraid to say that out loud, because I've had people on the left on my show too who have been canceled just for stating the obvious. We are not robots. You can't just interchange our parts and make people think it's going to be all okay. That's wrong. That's evil. That's not true. And a discussion, full stop. Coming back to the federal election, the Tories could probably take a majority government literally by proposing a total ban and stop on all transgender surgery below the age of 18. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. I don't think that's a flamboyant thing to say at all, or an ostentatious thing. It's like, no, children are children, and we are not going to allow for there to be agenda that literally is life-altering, irreversible damage in the realm of the most central part of your human being as a material being. Like, forget us who believe in souls. You people who don't believe in souls, like, what you are is a self-reproducing machine with another human being, right? That's what you are. You're an organism that produces more of you. That's like the central tenet of what you are. That's evolution 101. And so if you don't make more of yourself, you will cease to exist as a people, as a species. And that's it. You want to pass on your culture, your values, everything else. You need to reproduce. You can't reproduce if you are going to surgically alter your genitalia and your sexually reproductive system. You can't. And I don't think you have the right, I don't think anyone has the right to sterilize a child, even a child who's asking to be sterilized. But then again, how would a child know what sterilization means? It's like a child asking for you to murder him or her because they're having a bad day. Children can't consent to suicide any more than they can consent to puberty blockers. They don't understand. And the least we can do is ban the inalterable, irreversible damage that such fooling around with such dangerous ideas could produce when it comes to children. You're an adult. You want to make that decision as an adult. I don't agree with it, but this is Canada, and I can't do anything about it. Good for you. Whoop-de-doo. But children deserve their innocence. They have a right to their innocence. And ripping that away from them through indoctrination and confusing them and giving them gender dysphoria through absolutely bizarre ideologically charged rhetoric from the pulpit of sex ed or teachers or your principal or whatever, or assemblies with bringing in a guest speaker. That's all wrong. And it all leads one place, which is children fundamentally being unhappy with themselves. And from that unhappiness, absolute tragedy ensues. So if the federal conservatives are looking for an issue that would literally land the majority, that's not the only issue, but that would be a big one. That is an issue that could easily knock over some toss-up ridings, motivate the base to come out harder, motivate the base to get more organized and spend more money on donations, and totally change the tone when it comes to Aaron's rhetoric and symbology. So that was kind of our opening bit there. We've kind of cruised along for a little while here. Let's jump into some of the things that my dear producer has produced for us when it comes to the election. Let's start with this. Let's talk about election integrity. Canadian voters are likely to face foreign cyber interference in the next election, say cyber spies. Digital Spy Agency expects false narratives around voter fraud to surface. Canadian voters are likely to face some form of foreign cyber interference ahead and during the next federal election, warns Canada's cyber spy agency, including false information about voter fraud. However, that meddling is unlikely to match the scale and influence as seen in the U.S., says the communications increasing our threat on cyber tools, organizational capacity, cyber activity against future federal elections. Says cyber threat actors will likely try to take advantage of any new COVID-19 related changes. Expect an increase in mail-in ballots. So I want to stop dead here, and we're going to observe two things. Okay, so we've just read through this a little bit, and what is happening here is important. Who is speaking and who are they speaking to? So we have the head of or a statement coming out of the CSE, right? The Communication Security Establishment. And it's being read from the report. So it's not a person, it's this establishment. So this is speaking on behalf of this is speaking on the Canadian equivalent of the CIA, essentially, right? CSIS is the big guy, but I mean, this is speaking on behalf of all Canadian intelligence, like that is to say our intelligence agencies and apparatuses, which includes the RCMP, it includes CSIS, it includes all sorts of different things, it includes the Army, all those pieces put together. This person is speaking on behalf of all of them in the sense that they are making a firm declaration on election integrity. So people might be sowing false stories about voter fraud, about election integrity fraud, about a lack of transparency. Okay, that's called salting the field. That's called conditioning the argument. You've already, by the very way you framed your opening statement and especially as an institution, you're somebody who's in charge. You have framed this in some very, very dark terms because you have essentially decided that, well, anybody saying that there might be fraud or there might be something wrong is a foreign actor sowing dissent and quite possibly a betrayer to Canada, a traitor. That's a statement. For saying, you know what, I have some questions about the integrity of this election, could be essentially be said, well, I mean, you're just a puppet of Russia. You're just you are a foreign agent or being paid by foreign powers to influence Canadians to make them doubt the integrity of their elections, which is funny because I was never really trying to do that. But now that you're saying it, I mean, I didn't really want to get paid to do that. I wasn't looking for foreign money in my bank account on that count, but I'll take some free foreign money if they want to, because I do have questions about election integrity and I'm just asking those for free. So I didn't know I could get paid for it, but let's see here. The issue took hold during the last year's U.S. election after then President Donald Trump made unfounded claims about widespread voting fraud. Okay. Yeah, there it is. And that's the CBC for you. I'm going to zoom in a little bit for you guys. What happened during the 2020 election? We need to step back for a second. We need to be honest about something here. That's another thing that Canadians don't envy about the American election. The American system is completely decentralized when it comes to how they elect their presidents and how they elect their national government. And At one point, I explained to somebody that everybody from touch screens to carrier pigeons were on the table when it came to a U.S. election. And that is not really an overstatement. Um, American elections are an absolute debacle because they have no federal agency that conducts their federal election. I'm not a big state guy. I'm not. I don't want there to be a federal agency for everything. And I think plenty of the federal agencies in Canada that are alphabet soups could go away. I don't think they have a lot of legitimacy. We need to gather our revenue, which should be streamlined, and we need to vend those services which people are entitled to in Canada. And we need to do that in an efficient manner as well. Outside of that, a lot of what the government does is wasteful, and a lot of it's paper pushing, and a lot of it's a lack of accountability. And we all know that. However, in America, because they have that suspicion about everything, they have failed to complete that one brutal task of simply creating a federal elections commission that would take care of their federal elections and help ensure there was integrity. In America, you can get a mail-in ballot not by your own request, but by, the ballot master general, whatever, the postmaster general in your local district, declaring that everybody gets a paper ballot, that everybody gets one sent to their house. And the elections commissioners in the United States, in several swing states and several battleground ridings, they did this. And this is where things get hairy. In Canada, to get a mail-in ballot, you must ask for it. That's it. Full stop. You must request a mail-in ballot. You cannot have it just randomly sent to your house. It doesn't just come in the mail, and it can't be mishandled by someone, and it can't be picked up by someone and filled out on your behalf, because that person would have to know when it's arriving in your mailbox. If you send out 10 million ballots via mail that are unsolicited, then I just have to keep visiting postal boxes, and I will find ballots, won't I? I'll find them because they'll be there. And I'm not saying I'm not even saying as a postman. I'm not trying to denigrate our postmen or question their integrity. I'm just saying those postal boxes are not super well secured. You break into one and you don't even steal anyone's bill or check. You're just stealing their ballot. You grab their ballot, you fill it out on their behalf, you get enough of them going. You get 5 ballots, 10 ballots, 30 ballots. That's enough to swing an election in some of the tightest ridings we have in this country, let alone the United States, let alone the fact that it does seem to be that there were a lot of extra ballots returned where there shouldn't have been. There are people who never received their ballot. I'm someone who's never received a ballot before. Here's a free take for you. I never received my ballot for the leadership election where Bernier lost to Scheer. So that was an election ago and when Andrew Scheer became leader of the party. I lost. Like, I didn't get my ballot. Like, I never saw it. They had my address. I had been a paid up member. I told them I wanted my ballot or whatever, and I never got my ballot. I'm not saying somebody filled that out on my behalf and made Scheer beat Bernier. I would have voted for Bernier, and probably Trost. But the fact of the matter is, we're here at the end of these things, and what's the point? Like, I didn't get my ballot. How many other people didn't get their ballot? I heard that story a couple of times with different people. Do I think it's a conspiracy necessarily? No, I don't think there was a conspiracy in the leadership election of the Conservatives, which took place in 2017. I don't think that there was a conspiracy to make sure that me and a bunch of other Conservatives didn't get their ballots. However, I do believe that the fact that we didn't get our ballots shows just how stupid mass balloting is by sending it through the mail, because you can't tell who is going to get their ballot and who isn't. If they solicit their ballot and it's put in through kind of secured mail, it's delivered, people fill out their ballot and then send it back, that's different. That's how Donald Trump voted for himself. And he was voting from Florida. He was using his address in Florida to vote for himself, which good for him, because he wasn't going to win. He wasn't going to win DC, so he spent his vote on a swing state. Good for him. The point that I'm trying to drive home here is that they're salting the field. America does have voter fraud problems. It's always had voter fraud problems. And it won't stop having voter fraud problems until it gets its federal system. Russia, China, and Iran named. Groups and individuals connected to Russia, China, and Iran have conducted most of the observed cyber threat security against democratic processes. Okay. So basically, they're telling us that we are going to be attacked by Iran and China and Russia and told that our election isn't safe and secure. All I have to say to you, whoever you are listening, is that if you want election integrity, do your best to show up in person to vote, even with the pandemic so recently behind us. And if anybody at any level of government says that you just mail out all the ballots and have them all sent back in, no. People must request, with proper identification and proof, mail in ballots. No unsolicited ballots. Unsolicited ballots are a gateway into voter fraud. A total gateway. It's wrong. And a final point I want to drive home here when it comes to the question of election integrity. The other day we were at a fabric store. We were grabbing some stuff from a fabric store. And my beloved and I and one of her helpful co-conspirators who's helping with all the decorating and that sort of stuff. And so we're at this fabric store, and they refused to take my better half's $50 bill. And she looked at them, and one of the reasons I'm marrying this person is she has real gumption on stuff like this. She stands her ground. She's brilliant. She's much braver than I am in many respects. And she looked them dead in the eye. She said, "You can't not take my money. That's illegal. Like, this is for all debts, public and private. This is legal tender. You are not allowed to refuse legal tender." And the person just looked back at her and said, we have been getting fakes. We've been getting counterfeit $50 bills. So I'm not taking your money. And they had a back and forth for a bit. And eventually, my beloved paid with credit. She later reflected that it was only going to be about $7 out. So she should have just left the 50 there and said, "I'm taking my stuff. Here's the $50. If you want to cash it, cash it. If you don't, charge me with shoplifting. Go ahead. See what happens." It's legal tender. Keep the evidence, by the way. So I guess that what I'm trying to drive home there is, if people are capable of faking 50s, why do we not think that people are capable of faking ballots? Now, people have to say, well, what are the stakes? Well, the stakes are, in the United States, the stakes were exorbitantly high, right? They were as high as they would get, right? Like, was Trump really the disruptor we all think he was? Only partially. He was really just a gadfly. He was really just a digital gadfly on Twitter and everything else to try and get us to think again about questions of class, inequality, foreign influence, China, domestic manufacturing, the working man, the working family, the working class, what it means to be an American, what it means to have a national sense of pride, a national strategy, and world peace, in the sense of foreign policy should result in less wars, not more of them. That's what Donald Trump was for. I hope that we see another Trumpian-like character again in America in the not so distant future. But we can't have that in Canada. We've talked about that before. You can't have a Trump-like figure in Canada or Bernie Sanders in Canada. Why? Because they would never be allowed to run, because the leader of the party would rule them out, cast them out, cross out their name, not sign their nomination papers a long time ago. That's how that works in Canada now. And Stuart Parker's talked to us about that a lot lately. But let's get back on track here. If we can fake $50 bills, we can fake an election ballot. Okay? Like, it can't be that hard. And I don't know who's passing out $50 bills at the fabric store. Like, why that's the place you're spending your money for fake 50s. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know why you need to buy your fabric with fake money, but I guess not even good for you, but like I'm impressed that you got away with it, but I'm just still confused that you got away with it at a fabric store. Like I don't know why you wanted to do that, but don't bother. But election integrity, it's not rocket science. It's not rocket science. It's very easy to have that go wrong. Federal, what is this? Is this about Canada or is it about the other one? Yeah, okay. A couple of things that are going to be featured in the election. Let's grab something else to screen share here. Let's talk a little bit about the Green Party again. This has been an interesting thing to watch. We'll talk about it more tomorrow as well with our contributors. But the Green Party is a bit of an interesting thing to watch for a couple of reasons, because the Green Party is what a lot of both progressives and conservatives wish their parties could be. It's a reinvigoration of the progressive conservative idea. And I'm only commenting on this again. How much does the Green Party mean to Western Canadians and stuff? Not that much, though. Admittedly, some of their seats are out here. Some of the only places they've managed to get elected, right, out here, British Columbia, and then of course back in New Brunswick. But of course, that person walked across the floor and went to the Liberals, which is not going to bode well for them. So the turmoil in the Green Party, we've talked about this a little bit when it comes to capture and that sort of thing. But like the Green Party, I guess, in a sense, is still a small enough place with thin enough walls that we can actually hear what's happening over there, right? Like sometimes the big rich guy gets divorced. And you're like, wow, I really wonder what was going on there. Like you think she would have stayed with him just for the money. And I mean, obviously, she has a right to some of the money due to our laws and stuff like that. And we'll see how well she does. We'll see what kind of lawyer she can afford. But sometimes the rich guy does get divorced, but it comes out of nowhere because he was up in his house, which is a few meters back from the street and is a nice big house with big, thick walls. And there's no way to know what's going inside of there until one day you see a moving truck, but the house hasn't been sold. And the Green Party is the opposite of that. The Green Party, while it looks a little bit more polished, is like one of the tiny homes that you see in some of these lots now. There's tiny homes. There are these half lots. Instead of it being the broad side of the house facing the street, it's the narrow side of the house faces the street. And the people inside of it are a little bougie and a little posh and a little bit, bohemian. And they're kind of yuppie, but they in between what they're smoking and what they're drinking, they can get a little raucous. And so we are actually hearing the dirty laundry being discussed of the Green Party out loud, where the quiet parts being said out loud. And it's kind of an interesting thing to see because you don't get to see that in many places anymore. Elizabeth May speaks out about rumors swirling around Green Party turmoil. Well, let's take a look here. Former Green leader Elizabeth May is speaking out after months of near silence on the internal strife engulfing the party she headed for 13 years. The statement to media Tuesday afternoon, May says rumors about her involvement in party power struggles have pushed her to clarify that she has no role in the Greens' governing bodies. Members of the Federal Council, which governs most of the party's affairs, have clashed with leader Anna May Paul for months over issues that range from the Israeli-Palestine conflict to staff layoffs and funding for Paul's riding campaign in Toronto Centre. May says she did have firsthand knowledge of Green MP Jenica Atwin's defection to Liberals last month, a loss of 1/3 of the Green caucus that May called painful, but no cause for misplaced anger, blame, and name-calling. May says she fully supports the Green Party, adding simply that our leader is Anna May Paul, and only our members have the authority to call that into question. Falling short of a full-throated endorsement, statement comes a day after Paul held a news conference to show her party has pushed a period of tumultuous acrimony ahead of a likely election this year. Interesting. Well, we're getting to see that dirty laundry out loud and outside. People are talking about it. People are saying it. People are going through it, and we're getting to hear it because the Green Party is still just a small enough place that and with thin enough walls that you can hear that stuff. So that's interesting. Let's take a look here. A few more things on the Canadian election. Apparently, Mark Carney was going to run for the Liberals, but he's not going to run for them anymore until this federal election is over. So that mostly because I think he doesn't want the press of doing it. So let's zoom in on that a little bit. So who was Mark Carney? Well, we all remember who Mark Carney was. Says he won't run, won't be in on the Liberal ticket if there's an election this fall. The former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England told the Canadian press he's made commitments to help in the global fight against climate change. He can't walk away from them just a few months before a crucial United Nations conference. Oh, I see. So he busy. He busy with climate change stuff. He doesn't have time for us little people. Well, I think the real reason Mark Carney isn't going to run, I don't know if he necessarily wasn't going to win. Maybe they did some polling and said, it's iffy. I doubt that. They would have put him into a safe seat. I think the reason that he's really not going to run is he doesn't want to come in until it's more clear that Trudeau is going to leave. It's between Mark Carney and, oh my goodness, what is her name? Why can't I remember who it is? Trudeau's cabinet. There we go. Chrystia Freeland, and of course the other one. Who's the other one? Not Chrystia Freeland. Catherine McKenna. McKenna and Freeland basically run the government. We both know that in many respects. And Justin Trudeau has kind of deferred it to them in their entirety. And so between Freeland, McKenna, and Carney, that's who is going to take the next Liberal leadership position, which we all know, right? That's not news. We all know that. The question is, when is Justin going to leave? He's very young. He's extremely young. He's one of the youngest prime ministers we've ever had. And so the question becomes, will Justin leave? Will he stay? Is he going to stick around? And I think that Justin Trudeau isn't going to stay very long after this last mandate. They're going to ride his name one more time. He'll have had his 3 elections. He won 3 times, which is what you need in Canada to prove that you belong with Chrétien, you belong with Trudeau Sr., and you belong with John A., and you belong with, I don't think Louis St. Laurent did that, but I think King did, Mackenzie King. And I think that's exactly it. I think that Trudeau will take his 3rd mandate, do a victory lap, stay in Parliament for a couple of months, and then he'll leave. And that'll leave things wide open for kind of reformation of the Liberal Party into a kind of perfectly technocratic machine. This is interesting. Like we're going to get back into we'll get back into the Mark Carney thing in a second, but I've been talking about technocracy on the show, well, because the show started in COVID, right? I've been talking about technocracy on the show for a long time. And one of the things I want to get into here for just a second is, like, if we're headed back into the 1920s again, if the 2020s are going to be like the 1920s, one of the things that happened throughout the 20s and the 30s was this bizarre pivot into, right? We saw that fascism and collectivism and communism and totalitarianism, but part of that was a pivot into, what we see in Art Deco and everything else of that time period. That was the great kind of burgeoning of industrialization that was coming after the war. So the war had kind of put them through another industrial intensity, right? Because even up until World War I, 50% of the population of all Western countries still lived in the country. They still lived in the rural parts of their country because it still took an enormous amount of manpower to make the food to feed the world. And after World War I, that slowly changed. That definitively changed. The city became the new center. The small towns started to empty, and the big towns started to get big, really big. And if you go through old towns, not the ones that got bombed to the ground in Europe, though there's still a few pieces of them left that you can see that. But if you go through old towns, particularly in the United States, you'll see just so much evidence of what happened in the 1920s. And we all know that the 20s and the 30s right? Some of the skyscrapers, all that sort of stuff happened. What am I getting on about? What I'm getting on about is that into the 20s and then the 30s and then the 40s, right? The Liberal Party of Canada, headed up by Mackenzie King, right, comes into being and becomes kind of this perfectly technocratic entity that really was almost indistinguishable from the non-genocidal side of Nazi Germany. It had ministers who were the ministers of everything, like C.D. Howe. It had a completely centralized plan of how to adjudicate things in Canada. It aggrandized itself in a huge way, including the custom scandals we all remember. King versus Byng. King had the ostentatiousness to fight the vice-regal representative, of course, who's Governor Byng, and to essentially fundamentally undermine the Governor General for the rest of eternity. He won that fight, and to this day, nobody takes the Governor General very seriously. And then, especially as we get into the war, and Mackenzie King continues to run the war effort, again, in a very technocratic way. And finally, into the post-war era, he essentially sets up Canada as a vassal state to the United States as a branch plant system. So put your wartime factories are now going to become consumer time factories. Let's build cars here. Let's build planes here. This is where de Havilland comes from, right? And the Beaver and the Otter and the Twin Otter, all of that comes together. We still build some of the de Havillands, right? The Buffalo, the Water Bomber. All of that comes together, and Canada is turned into this perfectly kind of technocratic state, a model state, a model technocracy in post-war era. Now, what's happening right now with the Liberal Party of Canada? If they successfully rebrand, they've recaptured the imaginations of Canadians, right? Because they have this charismatic leader. Now, he had no depth and almost no intelligence. He doesn't know what he's doing. He has no idea what's going on. If people even think he has brilliant electoral strategy, he's a little bit of a strategic thinker when it comes to like how to be popular, I guess. But ultimately, he has handlers. People are telling him what to do every day, all the time. They're guiding him through things, using his name as cover, using his name to get him elected. Now, at some point, that's got to give, because I mean, whether it's the scandals that are coming out of Parliament and his inability to keep it in his pants, which is just a statement of fact, there's no need to get into any proper accusations on that count. But the truth of the matter is that our Prime Minister is not a chaste man, and not a chaste man even for the proper side of the species. Our Prime Minister, and for that matter, the alienation of his wife, because we have to remember for a time there, Sophie was living away from him, probably because of his proclivities, and also because, quite frankly, I mean, she's beautiful, she's brilliant, she can do what she wants, and she could definitely get very far in life without having to use him. She has her own background, her own money, her own legacy. But one way or another, again, the handlers stepped in, managed to pull Sophie back into the fray, managed to say, hey, be a good wife, be a nice wife, help the Prime Minister get reelected, help Justin out. And so they did. But hopefully his marriage doesn't end. I don't want anyone's marriage to end, but he's been Prime Minister now for a few years. He'll be Prime Minister for another 2, maybe 3, probably 2 after this election. He'll have won his 3 mandates. And he can go off into the sunset, leaving his party in the hands of, honestly, far more competent people, who I still don't trust, but far more competent people, such as Chrystia Freeland, McKenna, and then, of course, Carney, who will enter politics just a little while, just as he leaves, because the kingmakers have decided that Carney deserves a place in government. And that's the thing about Canada. Canada is a strange place. It's basically a one-horse town, and the one horse is the Liberal horse, the kind of half donkey thing in the corner that's half mule, half donkey, half bizarre that we call the Conservative Party. It really does make an ass of itself most of the time, and it doesn't know what to do. It doesn't know how to gallop like a horse. It doesn't know how to look prim and proper. It doesn't know how to look competent and strong. It's a workhorse. It'll work. Like, conservatives know how to work, and conservative governments are hard-working governments. There's no question of that. But it just looks goofy. It looks silly. It looks pathetic. And so until Conservatives not just improve their image in general, but just come off as not just a workhorse, but a competent one, a competent, confident, intelligent, insightful, visionary workhorse, they're not going to get anywhere. And with respect to what's going on here with Carney, we're going to bring that back into the stream. So apparently he's hanging out doing climate change stuff while he's busy, right? It's just a crucial conference. I thought long and hard on this because I believe strongly in public service and in the government's agenda, which I fully support. In the end, despite the temptation running and the wrestling with it, commitment's a commitment. So he'll be stuck with stuff like that. His work will be crucial to the success of the UN conference known as COP26. It's critical time in the COP26, COP26. Made commitments. Carney did not rule out running if there was another time. Infrastructure, Catherine Lau says she would not seek re-election in Ottawa Senate. Okay, that's interesting. Prime political real estate that could become a launching pad for Carney. Especially that Ottawa South, David McGuinty, Canada Carlton, Karen McCarran step aside, open up their spots for Carney. Still bank at Governor Gill in 2012, quietly flew with the idea of leadership run, courted by Liberals desperately searching for a new savior after the 2011 election flameout. Book promoting a vision, a new kind of Canada that combines the pursuit of profit with social purpose. All righty. Well, that's Carney. I don't know what to say to that. I think the thing with Carney is that he's a globalist and he's a perfect technocrat. And I have to admit that if we have to be stuck with the Liberal Party for as long as we're going to be stuck with them until the Conservatives get their crap together, I think that I would definitely take a Carney over a Trudeau, because the thing with Trudeau is that he's terrifyingly egotistical, and he also has no sense of values. He has no values. Like, he doesn't cling to his faith at all for values. He doesn't do anything for his values. And so it's just, he has no sense of morality and ethics that might guide his governance. He's not even good at being a bad governor. You know, he just does whatever his handlers tell him to do. And his handlers always tell him the same thing, which is increase your spending and keep virtue signaling. And I don't like that. Carney, I think, understands the value of a dollar to a point. I mean, he ran two banks. You'd hope that he would know how much money you have and how much money you don't have, and then how much money you can spend. I would hope for that, but I have doubts. I mean, he gets paid either way, right? So if he overspends our money, if he doesn't overspend our money, who knows? Let's talk a little bit more about at least one issue that's going to be pretty close to the hearts of Western Canadians. And that is, of course, the gun buyback. So gun owners hold signs as they participate in a rally organized by the CCFR against the government's new gun rules. And that was in September of 2020. I'm starting to get better after my late nights guarding the cathedral from would-be arsonists, but I'm still a little bit tired. I might take another nap today because I got to be on again tonight at like 3 a.m. Gun buyback, a huge taxpayer boondoggle at the worst possible time. Taxpayer advocacy group. The federal government's plan to buy back newly banned guns will cost a lot more than its initial estimate, says the tax advocacy group. The cost could be hundreds of millions of dollars more than what we were sold on, said Franco Terrazzano, a director with the CTF. Really, this has the makings for a huge taxpayer boondoggle, which would be coming at the worst possible time. Parliamentary Budget Officer released a report at the end of June indicating that the number of affected firearms was roughly 150,000 and 518 according to the Canadian Sports Arms and Ammunition, the CCAAA. I think that used to be the CSSA. I don't know why this is CSAAA, but oh well. Depending on the actual number of effective firearms, buyback, take-up rate, the pricing structure, the estimated cost of compensation could be as high as $756 million if all gun owners identified by the CSAAA participate in the buyback. $1 billion, because by the time it's administered, right, always a quarter of, like, take some things by a third or by a quarter and then add it to just know what it's going to take to administer something, right? Because you got a lot of people's paper to push, right? You got a lot of work to do. What about capture? What about having to do follow up, right? And all the rest of it. And I actually, here's something. So my dearest is works for the Canadian government, and a lot of what she does is following up with people to try and see what's going on and where the money is that they owe. So I'm trying to imagine for a moment, like, I mean, that's bad enough, but that's like taxation, and like taxation is taxation. Do I agree with how much we get paid? We get taxed this country? No, I don't. But death and taxes, right? Like, nobody's going to argue that point. So I'm trying to imagine getting a phone call that says, "Hi, my name is Sherry, and I work with the Canadian regulations around firearms, right? I work with the Firearms Board of Canada." It's like that, or even the RCMP. I'm Sherry. I'm calling you on behalf of the RCMP to let you know that we need you to turn in your gun. You'll be given your compensation. I'm trying to imagine that phone call. I'm trying to imagine that back and forth. I'm trying to imagine what somebody might say to that person if they were really upset. And for that matter, we know they're armed. So I just don't see that going well. It's one thing when you're being told, "Hi, I'm an auditor with the CRA," or "Hi, I'm with BC Revenue Agencies," or "Hi, this is Impark, and you owe us $30 in tickets. Now it's $300 in tickets because we're jerks." Yeah, I get that, but again, calling a person, most likely a man, and a lot of people who work for the government are women. So you have a woman on the phone calling a man, telling him that they're going to take his gun away, and they're giving him less than market value for it. I see that going badly. I see that being a really, really negative conversation. And just one more thing that's going to add to the problems of the federal election. The gun buyback program is a huge boondoggle, but at the same time, I don't think I've even heard anything from the Conservatives about this. It's been totally silent on this question. So get rid of that. The last thing that we're going to get into here is the idea of Canada's history. So obviously, a lot of Canadian history is under attack right now because, quite frankly, Canadians never knew their history to begin with. And now somebody's actually bothering to erase it. And now suddenly we're all up in arms. And that might sound kind of cynical. But the truth is that Canadians didn't know their history very well to start with. And now we're finally getting into a point where Canadians need to be honest about how bad things have gotten. And that is to say, in current history and our current civilization. And so they're looking to the past to save them, and there's some values back there. And the other side is looking to the past to burn it down, because obviously that's why things are bad today, is because of what happened yesterday. It's nonsense. Erasing and falsifying Canada's history jeopardizes the underpinnings of society, say historians. As the trend of removing symbols of Canada's past and renaming buildings and streets grows, historians warn of the consequences of attempts to misrepresent or erase the country's history. If you control the past, you control the present and the future. The aim of those who want to control the past, either obliterating it or attaching shame to those who cling to the past, is a desire to clear the public space, to wipe it clean of symbols and mythology and narratives, or replace it with something else. It's an old trick. It's an old trick. If you want to shape the future, go after a country's history. The history of a country, the legacy of a family. We do this all the time. I want you to take two families, maybe even their siblings, right? So the two brothers are siblings. And one of them manages to get married and stay married, and the other one gets divorced. Now, the children from the stay married family, provided that it's not an abusive household that just didn't result in divorce, they're going to grow up believing like their parents love them, and they love that their parents love each other, and that stability in the family is a fundamental. This is reality. That's what happens. That's the default position. The children on the other side are going to grow up thinking that families are inherently unstable, perhaps even unsafe, right? And that you can't trust anybody because, hey, even mom and dad got divorced. That's not good. And finally, if either of those spouses, those former spouses, begins to denigrate the other one and shape the narrative around that child's mind, right? They're going to think that part of them is wrong. Your father is such a bastard. Your father is such a bad person. I hate your father. Your father carouses. Your father, right? Like, even now that we're not together anymore, he carouses and whatever. The same thing going the other way. Your mother is such a B word, a lot of other words we won't say on the show. Your mother never loved me. Your mother never was comely and never cared. Your mother nagged me to death. You hear that enough times from either spouse, former spouse, ex-spouse. And what's going to happen inside of that kid's head is they're going to start to believe that they are part bad because they know that they're half of one of the parent. That's how it works. Even children understand, without maybe necessarily knowing the biology of it all, one man plus one woman equals child, provided that, God blesses their union. And so that child's going to grow up thinking that they are half bad. They are half evil. They are half something terrible. And what we need to realize is that that's what we're doing every time we misinterpret our history and tell people that, hey, your founding prime minister was a flaming racist and a white supremacist who should be killed if he ever walked the earth again. But he won't walk the earth again. So instead, we're going to tear down his statues and vandalize his home and his home riding and everything else. And I guess the point that I'm trying to draw here is that we need to be honest about the fact that people aren't going to people don't just tear down things for the sake of tearing down things. If you tear something down, somebody else is putting something up. And they're going to shape that narrative to the best of their ability. Absolutely they are. And if you don't do very strategic planning around that, you are in for a world of pain, a world of hurt. The fact of the matter is that falsifying and erasing our history is a guaranteed way of creating an abusive present. Because if we were just abusive in the past and there's no virtue then, why is there any point in having virtue now? When we redeem our image of our parents in our past, when we kind of see what was wrong but also what was right, when we take that cross of interpreting your own story and doing your best to interpret it accurately but also redemptively, then you can get somewhere. But as a country that has just completely lost its mind and has decided that it's somehow this racist, genocidal juggernaut, when we still don't have the population to properly build an army, can't even cover the face of our own corner of the earth. It's so vast and we are so small. I'm not saying that bad things didn't happen. They did happen. There was some really bad stuff that happened throughout the 20th century and before. But we Canadians would do well to remember that we live in one of the most just societies on earth. And anything less than that is simply us denigrating ourselves in a way that it doesn't need to be. We've made mistakes, but the answer is not to just go and have terribly negative things to say about our people, about our time, about who we are. Well, I think that's about the show for today. It's been a bit of a long one for me. And I'm thankful for everybody who has tuned in. Again, this was pre-recorded, and being pre-recorded makes it a little bit different. We don't have the comments, we don't have the live interaction, and some of that energy I get from the crowd just isn't quite there. But I am hopeful that people enjoy this pre-recorded version of Mountain Standard Time. I hope that it felt fairly similar in flavor and candor. Again, I wanted to mention that I am officially going on hiatus as of the end of tomorrow's broadcast. Well, it'll be a recording as well. I'm hopeful to have Stuart and Aaron on. They are, of course, as always, our most faithful contributors and always give us an interesting perspective. But maybe just as I leave, actually, I'd like to give a little bit of a defense to why I always chosen or have had them as my most consistent people on this show. And I think that there was at least a couple of reasons. One of them was, if we're going to talk about sovereignty, we need to talk about it with all sides. We can't have Western Canada go off into the nethers without an honest discussion with our brothers and sisters who do not share our perspective exactly. I'd say most people who are sovereigntists are probably right-wing. There is such a thing as left-wing sovereigntists, and there is such a thing as left-wing separatists. And so, and for that matter, we have a left-wing separatist federal party and provincial party in Quebec. So obviously, separatism can be left-wing and right-wing. So I wanted to have that perspective on our show. That was really important to me. And they're also just blue chip contributors. Like they've done this for so long. They can talk for an hour and have no problem. And they just provide good TV, if you want to put it that way. They provide good TV. But they're very insightful people. And I think another aspect of it all was that there are also two people that are completely alienated from their side of the spectrum. And that's because they're still talking about class while everybody else is talking about race and other immutable characteristics that separate us and divide us. And I can't do anything about the pigment of my skin, right? Like, I'm a status Indian. Maybe for some people I look white passing. Fine, I don't care. I'm a status Indian. I got a card in my pocket and my skin tone is of a certain tone, and that's how it is. But I don't need to be treated because of my skin tone or because of the card in my pocket or whatever. I need to be treated because of my own integrity and how I carry myself. And there are people who don't look anything like me who also suffer from maybe similar problems or whatever. And if we could all get together and unite around a similar issue and then fight for that issue to be resolved, what the left currently calls intersectionality, but what used to be called solidarity, would occur. And in that solidarity, we would actually get some change, some forward progress. Having them on the show helps articulate that a little better, because they can point out really well that this is what's wrong. This is what's wrong from that perspective, from the language of a different perspective. And it's something that can then be used to help understand things from our perspective, which is further to the right, and how we might achieve our goals and our ends. I think as a last point too, as was mentioned not too long ago on here, there's only one group of people that are still talking about class, and that is the right. Race is totally dominating the left to the point where they're all in kind of an identitarian tizzy. And that's really bad, because you can't change your race. You can't do anything about your race. You're born with it. But you can do something about your behavior. And you can do something about your social status, especially if you work with other people of the same social status, to elevate your social status, or at least get paid better for being on the bottom of the tiers or below the top. And I think it's that simple. At least for me, it is. That's why I've had people of differing perspectives on this show quite frequently. But I'm thankful for these about 45, it'll be 46 episodes to be perfectly candid with you. But I'm thankful for these 40, 45, 46 episodes with the Western Standard that we've had. We're going on hiatus. Hopefully that hiatus comes to a close around September. And I want to say from the bottom of my heart, again, we do have one more show tomorrow, but that's going to be with guests. But at the bottom of my heart, I'm just deeply thankful for the opportunity I've been afforded here. And finally, there is no path forward. There is no path forward when it comes to what's going to happen with Canada and what's going to happen with the West, and for that matter, what's going to happen in your community without, again, I would use that word solidarity, but also a unification of purpose and an agreement on values. If you really believe that sovereignty is the only way forward, that's fine. But that's going to require communicating it and explaining your position and explaining why and helping people understand. And if there is one thing that is wrong in this world today and throughout the entirety of the 20th century, 21st century, it is the breakdown in communication. We have to be able to communicate. If we can't communicate, can't get anywhere. So I leave you with that thought. We'll see you tomorrow for one last show before I go on hiatus. This was Mountain Standard Time. Thank you so much for watching.